The theme of my talk today is things aren't always what they seem. And to kind of give you a feel for how I look at that overall, I want to introduce you to my two friends, Greg and Emma. Now, Greg is a golfer. I get to play with him occasionally in foursomes. He's a lot of fun, but he went through a stage of his life where he became addicted to golf. And I know there are some people in the room who can understand that feeling. You play 3 or 4 good rounds, and all of a sudden you're ready to take on Tiger Woods, right? You're going to take lessons, you're going to buy clubs, you're going to upgrade your equipment. You just think, oh, this game's not that hard. Well, Emma was feeling really left out. In fact, Greg was playing so much that I advised him to go home a few times and check on his newly formed golf widow. Well, one night Emma took things into her own hands when Greg didn't show up at 5 o'clock on a Sunday the way he was supposed to. And so she decided to teach him a lesson, and she wrote a note. Greg, I can't compete with golf. I'm leaving you. And she left the note on the kitchen counter. Then she went hide under the bed so that she could see his reaction to reading the note. Greg sauntered in about 30 minutes later, mumbling something about foursomes and fivesomes that were too slow on the course. He read the note, set it down, picked up his cell phone, dialed a number, and said, honey, she's finally left. Pack a bag, we're going to Cancun. He flipped the note over, he wrote something on it, set it down, got his car keys, and left. Well, you can imagine Emma under the bed is distraught, right? She's crying, she's upset. She comes out from under the bed, she walks into the kitchen, she picks up the note to look what he wrote. And what did it say? Emma, I can see your feet under the bed. I'll be back in 5 minutes, we're out of bread. Things are not always what they seem. And when you deal with healthcare and the federal government and the way they monitor and regulate health insurance, things are not always what they seem. I want to call your attention to these slides here I'm going to use. First of all, this is a love note from our attorneys. They love us, they love me, they say, you know, Mike's our buddy and we like him, but you're not obligated to believe a word he says. All right, let's talk about 2023 in the health insurance landscape. First of all, the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, the gift that keeps on giving, has spawned another lawsuit that is actually going to have real impact on your health insurance. It's called Braidwood Management versus Becerra, and we're going to talk about that in a little more detail. For those of you who are aware, the Medicaid program is now on a regulatory basis going to unwind hundreds of thousands of members who've been held in the program by the public health emergency, but haven't had their income or their place of residence checked in about 3 years. They're under an order to start letting those people out of Medicaid. We believe the first disenrollments will happen on July the 1st. So how are we preparing for that? And Michael can tell you we've got a lot of plans. The family glitch fix is in play. If you don't know what that is, it's a delightful story. And I'm going to tell you that story in just a minute. We've noticed that Humana has exited the commercial marketplace here. Now, Humana wasn't in the individual marketplace, but they have a strong presence in the government business, MA and Medicaid, which we expect to continue. And currently, carriers like Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Louisiana, we're essentially buried in about $9 billion of regulatory project work as an industry that are going to really change the landscape of finances in the health insurance business over the next few years. Do you think I can cover all that in 30 minutes? I don't know. We're going to give it a run. I have my alarm set, so I won't keep you 1 minute past the time you need to go. Okay, let's start with the easy one. Back at 10 o'clock at night, on December 24th, 2009, I was in D.C. The Democrats in the Senate pushed through their version of the Affordable Care Act with 60 votes. They had a filibuster-proof majority, and then they went home for the holidays. We didn't know it at the time, but just recently it's come to our attention that buried within the 2,800 pages of that approval was something new and extraordinary that we'd never seen before. It granted veto-proof authority to a research agency composed of nothing but volunteers to make health insurance law by statute that would apply in all 50 states. Does that sound crazy? Just wait, it gets better. So the authors of the ACA, what they really wanted to do was they wanted to use their authority their newfound authority in health insurance to create critical wellness coverage at zero cost to the member, to encourage people to use those wellness features and make the country a healthier place, right? They didn't want money to be an obstacle to having your annual checkup or mammograms or pap smears or any of those things that we consider critical wellness in this day and age. So they sought out a group that was not subject to political bias, who could analyze ongoing research on wellness items and then make recommendations about which treatments, drugs, counseling sessions and services should be covered at $0 copay under this new authority in the ACA. They settled upon a group called the United States Preventive Services Task Force. Now, if you read that, does that sound like a government agency to you? It sounds like one to me. I read it and I thought, okay, this is a part of CMS, they're going to do their own thing. But the USPSTF is different. It was founded in 1983 as a nationalized group of experts on evidence-based medicine, which is very important. They studied panels of research to try to figure out the relative value of various wellness components that might be built into your health insurance. And then they would give those components a grade, A, B, C, D, or I, right? In the ACA, they basically said this: if the USPSTF grades a service at A or B, every insurance company in America has to cover that service for free for their members, $0 copay, right? But what they don't do, no cost-benefit analysis at all. The USPSTF does not look at the cost of any treatment that they specify has to be covered at $0, right? The members are all volunteers. None of them have been screened by the Senate or by any federal agency. They're very bright people and they're very well-meaning, but they are volunteers. They're not federal employees in any way. When they selected the USPSTF as one of 3 agencies that would make these recommendations, they gave them the force of law every time they made a recommendation. No one in the Center for Medicaid and Medicaid Services or HHS could veto their recommendations. As soon as the USPSTF, that's a mouthful, said it was law, end of story. So why am I regaling you with this now? Well, it turns out that this coverage has now blossomed to 53 different items that are covered by your health insurance plan today at $0 copay, specifically recommended by USPSTF. Now, I want to make it clear, that agency does not recommend or control contraceptive coverage. That $0 contraceptive coverage comes from a different agency. The vaccines that your children get that are free under your health insurance, that's a different agency. But everything else that you get for free in your insurance comes from them. Fast forward 10 years, an organization called Braidwood Management decided that they didn't think that organization, after a lot of study, should have the authority to make those recommendations. And so they filed suit against the federal government and said, guidelines issued this way cause legal jeopardy 2 different ways. It violates the appointment clause of the Constitution, and some of the requirements offend us, so it violates the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. They filed suit at Judge Reed O'Connor's court in Dallas, which happens quite a bit, and recently the case was decided against the government in September of 2022. The judge at the time said he needed some time to think about whether he would do an injunction or enforce it or what would happen next. So, the appointments clause was the first point of contention. It says basically that if a federal agency or the secretary of a federal agency can't overrule the decisions of an internal body, then those members have to be appointed and approved by the Senate or by the president. And since none of the members of USPSTF have ever been approved or appointed, the judge said that everything they've said since 2010 is not enforceable. All the way back to 2010. So where are we today? Let me give you a little more detail. Essentially, this happened on Friday last week. The judge issued a moratorium and said that if an insurance company or or an employer doesn't want to provide that service at $0, the feds can't enforce it on them. So now people are taking a look at the decision, what's going to happen. The Department of Labor immediately filed an appeal to the Fifth Circuit in New Orleans, which is going to happen over the next few months. And the Braidwood folks have said if they don't get what they want from the Fifth Circuit, they will take it to SCOTUS, to the Supreme Court. And looking at the makeup of the Supreme Court right now, they've probably got a pretty good chance of winning. So that's a long way around. What are we talking about here? We're talking about the fact that your health insurance and the coverage you have today of a whole bunch of things for a $0 copay at the appropriate time for the appropriate gender is going to become under threat a year from now, 2 years from now. I don't expect anybody to roll back any coverage in 2023. Large self-funded groups will have the option to talk about it and maybe roll some stuff back. But remember, for fully insured groups and individual coverage, state mandates still apply. And a couple of states have already indicated they're going to just take all of those mandates and make it state law. And that would still work. So that's kind of where we are right now. It is the most interesting thing to me that this agency worked for 10 years, 12 years, and nobody really questioned whether they had the authority to do what they do until about a year ago. And then they woke up and went, how can they get away with that? And apparently they can't. So we're going to watch that very closely. And if you'd like to stay on top of that, straighttalkla.com is the blog where we write about this stuff all the time. I'll tell you, if you go online and you want to read the blog, please make sure you put the LA at the end of the Straight Talk. If you don't, you'll be buying a cell phone, and you might already have one. You might not need it. We couldn't get Straight Talk. It was already gone. So we got straighttalkla.com for our URL address. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the Medicaid populations. In March of 2020, during the Trump administration, when COVID had everybody pretty scared, do you guys remember what that was like in the spring of 2020, in the summer of 2020? We had all these shutdowns, people were out of work. I think in Louisiana at one point we had over 300,000 people drawing unemployment, right? Which in a typical day like today, it's probably 12,000 people drawing unemployment. Well, in the middle of that, the administration realized that a lot of people were going to lose their health insurance coverage if they shut down the economy, and that terrified them. So what they did was they made an offer to all of the Medicaid programs in the nation that went like this. If you'll stop screening your existing Medicaid members, stop looking at their income, stop looking at things that might disqualify them, until the public health emergency ends, we will give you an extra 6.2% matching funds on top of what we're already paying you for Medicaid if you just hold these guys for continuous coverage. Well, that's been going on for 3 years. The continuous coverage is about to come to a screeching halt. The Department of Health here is already working very hard to screen these folks. My understanding is they've already screened 1 million of them electronically without having to find them and talk to them. But there are another 1 million people who are in Medicaid now that they need to touch individually. They need updated addresses and phone numbers and email. They're trying to text them. You're going to see billboards and ads all over the place encouraging people who are in Medicaid to reach out to LDH and update their contact information. The program is so pervasive in the state, I guarantee you everybody in this room probably knows someone or is friends with someone who's enrolled in the Medicaid program. If you have a minute with them, let them know it is imperative that they reach out to LDH and update their information. In the middle of the checking, they're going to start sending out letters to folks that are pink. So if you hear somebody talking about a pink letter in the mail, don't let them throw it away, because it might mean they lose their health insurance, okay? It looks like that when they do the requalifications based on income, remember, Medicaid eligibility here for a single is about $21,000 a year of income. If you're a single adult and you make more than that, you're probably not Medicaid eligible. If you're in a family of 4, the household income can go as high as $41,000, and the household still be covered under the Medicaid program. But beyond that, the adults in the household probably won't be eligible. So it's critical that this happens. In talking to the people at LDH, their expectation is that they're going to start disenrolling 25 to 30,000 people a month. And that's going to go on for a year, starting on July the 1st. So what are we going to do about that? Well, I can tell you at Blue Cross, we've spent a lot of time and energy talking to the foundation, talking to organizations out there in the marketplace who can reach out to these folks. If they're going to lose their coverage, we would sure like to have a smooth transition for them to the healthcare.gov marketplace. Healthcare.gov will open their marketplace for a special enrollment to anyone who loses their Medicaid coverage. The advanced tax credits and subsidies available on healthcare.gov are the highest they've ever been. In other words, the individual coverage on healthcare.gov is the cheapest I've ever seen, as long as I've been studying this. So there's no reason why anybody should remain uninsured if they're not Medicaid eligible. There will be plans where the premium will be zero. Now, there's danger in picking up a zero premium bronze plan off of healthcare.gov because they typically have very large deductibles, $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 a year. I really want to stress the fact that if you're in touch with anybody who's going to shop, tell them to use an agent. There are a lot of them out there. The agents don't charge a penny, and they're under no obligation to buy anything. But that healthcare.gov website is not particularly user-friendly, and there are a lot of ways you can mess up trying to buy health insurance, and it's too important to leave it to somebody who's never done it before. So we're going to be messaging that. We're putting it out into the world through social media, through advertising, through contacts with navigator and broker organizations. We want to make sure that these disenrollments don't get us back to the point where we were 10 years ago when 20% of the Louisiana population was uninsured. You realize that was only 10 years ago. Right now it's about 4%. And we'd sure like it if we could keep that number low like that. Make sense? Everybody with me? Good, good. The goal is a smooth transition. Here are some of the things that we're watching for that become hurdles for people as they move from Medicaid to private coverage. If you know anybody who's been on Medicaid or you've used it yourself, it's free. And when I say free, I mean free, 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 free. There are no premiums, there are no deductibles, there are no copays, no coinsurance. The only thing you have to worry about when you're on Medicaid is, will this doctor take what Medicaid pays? Once they let you in and they've got the card, your worries are over. You start dealing with your illness, whatever it is. No matter what level of private insurance people enroll in, they're going to have to talk about money again. Whether it's a copay or a deductible or coinsurance or premiums, it's a very different conversation and a different tool to use in the marketplace than Medicaid is. We want to make sure people have the guidance so that they know how to use it and that they get a plan with a network that actually includes a doctor they know or a doctor they want to use. And that's a battle. That's a challenge every day. So we're going to talk about it. It's not insurmountable, right? When the ACA started, we enrolled almost 200,000 people in 6 months. Boom, there they were. So we know that if people need care, they'll reach out. What's more worrisome is people who have chronic conditions who are used to picking up their blood pressure medicine, their cholesterol medicine, even metformin for free, and don't realize that you can get the exact same free medications on a private insurance plan like we have today. I want them to make sure they understand that if they enroll, even in a bronze plan, there will be certain medications that are covered 100%, and the least expensive ones that cover blood pressure, cholesterol, and typically blood sugar are included on those zero copay lists. So there is a possibility there that we can keep people's chronic conditions under control. The danger also, the last hurdle is, we don't want to revert back to the time when everybody used the emergency room as their primary source of care. If you've been to the emergency room lately, you know they're very busy, right? They're already quite busy, and you can't manage diabetes or high blood pressure or any kind of heart issue. You can't manage that with emergency room visits. They need a relationship with the PCP, and insurance is a gateway to that. So we're going to talk about it, and we're going to keep talking about it until it goes forward. But watch out for a lot of media attention given to the volume of people who are going to be disenrolled from Medicaid. They enrolled when their job was on pause and they had no incomes. And now, if they're single and they're making more than $10 an hour, they're not going to be eligible anymore. Their first stop should be their employer, right? Employer plans are going to be waiting, and they have been alerted, and they know this is coming. But they might not be able to afford their employer plan. In that case, healthcare.gov will be a better option for them, because the advanced tax credits you get to apply to your premiums are, like I said, the biggest I've ever seen. Making it even more interesting is something new that we've observed called the family glitch fix. Ooh, I am just regaling you guys with all kind of crazy words today. I know. I'm sorry in advance. When the ACA came out, it arbitrarily divided all businesses into two piles, okay? There was a pile of small groups, people who use less than 50 full-time equivalents of labor on an average month, and there was a pile called large group, people who use more than 50 full-time equivalents of labor in a month. The large group pile even had an official name, Applicable Large Employers, under the ACA. We call them ALEs. And you can take from that whatever you think. So at the end of the day, the ALEs have special responsibilities in the ACA, or they get fined if they mess up. Responsibility one, they have to offer a qualified health plan to every employee who averages 30 hours a week. And they have to offer it to 95% of those people and be able to validate that to the IRS. If they can't, they can be fined a lot of money. The second responsibility is they have to offer that plan to their employee under a definition of affordability. It's got to be affordable by a federal spec, okay? The third responsibility is they have to offer that same qualified health plan to that employee's dependents, but there's no affordability standard for dependent coverage. So if the employer doesn't want to put any of his money into the dependent coverage and force those dependents to pay the entire cost of that care, that's completely illegal. He won't get in trouble for doing it. Unfortunately, 10 years ago, the IRS said any dependent who gets that offer from an employer is not eligible to go to healthcare.gov and draw down all that nice money there. They have to take the employer's offer, even if it's horrible and unaffordable. In October, the IRS changed its mind and said, you know what, that was a bad decision, we're gonna flip on that. So for the last 6 months, there is now an affordability standard when you offer coverage to a dependent or to spouses in an employer setting. And that's new. I bet most of you didn't know that, right? Brand new. So that problem where the dependents and spouses were trapped in an unaffordable plan, we call that the family glitch. That was the nickname. What we're doing now is what we call the family glitch fix. Let me show you a little bit of how that works. What the IRS said was this: if I get an offer of coverage from my employer and he offers to cover my dependents, spouses, anybody else, then that coverage can't cost more than 9.12% of my household income. If it does, then those dependents and spouses are free to tell that employer, no thanks, and go to healthcare.gov and draw down all the tax credits they're eligible for. In fact, the website will screen the employer's plan. You go online and it asks you, did you get offered coverage from an employer? You say yes. It says, how much money does he want from you for that coverage? And then it asks you what your income is. And if the number comes out 9.12% or greater, you're free. They issue you a certificate that says, you've got an unaffordable offer, welcome to healthcare.gov. And they open the website, special enrollment, and you have 60 days to shop. As this got announced, I was asked to make a really quick video. I had slides, a camera, it was horrible. 18 minutes of me going blah, blah, blah in front of slides, right? It got 120,000 views on YouTube, okay? That is nuts. One of the views was from a very prominent auto dealer here in the state who called me. I never met him. And he said, you've got to explain this to me. I need to understand. What am I going to do? So I've run across him and other employers who their strategy going forward seems to be this. I'm going to put more money into the insurance I offer my employee, but I'm going to take the money that I've been offering to dependents and spouses, and I'm going to use that money and bring in agents and brokers and let them bring their families and show them how to get a better deal on healthcare.gov, to hold their hand and walk them through the process. And I thought, that is a really responsible way to handle this from an employer perspective, right? I loved every minute of it. So I want to make you aware of that. That's going on right now. And if you're an employer and you have the opportunity to put dependents and spouses on better coverage than you can afford, why wouldn't you, right? It's a good deal for everyone all the way around. So we're going to watch for that. That's called the family glitch. It has been fixed. The only thing you got to watch out for is this. I'm going to take a drink of water because this is a big one. If my wife and I both work and we both get offers of coverage from our employers, let's say I get 3 plans offered, she gets 3 plans offered, how do we know which one to test and be legal? And the statute says very clearly, you can only test the one that is the least expensive qualified health plan. So whichever one would cost us the least is the one we bring to healthcare.gov and test. If it fails, everybody's eligible, right? Everybody's eligible for healthcare.gov money. If we bring any other one, then we might have to pay back all of the money healthcare.gov gives us. So we've got to be very careful about how we enforce that. Everybody cool with that? I bet you didn't hear that before either, right? No. I'm full of useless stuff, let me tell you. Why is this going to be a big deal in Louisiana? Well, it turns out, according to the latest data I have, these are the 10 worst states for funding dependent and spouse coverage in the nation. The averages who put in the least amount of money for dependent and spouse coverage at the employer level. And you'll notice Louisiana is 49th out of 50 states. But then you look at the number and you say, you know, Mike, 12.5 is a lot of money to put into family coverage. It's over $1,000 a month. That's a really nice investment. It is true, but if I take out government groups and union groups, and I just focus on the private sector, that number drops from $12.5 to about $4,000. So in other words, this is not a problem people are going to experience if they're on the school board or a teacher. But they are going to experience it in the private sector. So that's where we have to be the most alert to what's going on. I think I kept in a picture. Oh, look, a picture. Don't you love pictures? All right. What I did here was I took a real quote that we issued to a business in Lafayette during November for 1-1 coverage. And I said, is this offer from this employer affordable? This employer is paying 25% of family coverage, and he's paying 75% of the employee-only coverage. And what you see, that line going across horizontally, is the cost to the family every month if everybody joins the plan. It's about $1,700 a month. The blue line running vertically like that represents 9.12% of all the household incomes across the bottom. I know you can't see it, but trust me when I say, this pretty typical plan under the new rules was unaffordable until that family's income hit $220,000 a year, which makes them in the 96th percentile of Louisiana households. So is this going to be widespread and everywhere? Yes, it is. And why is it? Because dependent and spouse coverage is expensive and employers are less and less willing to fund it. And so here is an out for those people, a path to solid, affordable coverage, again, just like our friends coming off Medicaid, back on healthcare.gov. If you haven't noticed, the theme so far is, boy, is the individual market about to get really big. And that's something we're planning for, and that's something we're watching for. All right, last thing I want to tell you about are these 3 projects. Now, this came from a presidential directive that was issued during the Trump administration. We thought when the Biden administration came in, surely they would burn it, right? Because they didn't want to do anything Trump said to do. But they kept these 3 projects. They're designed to expose to consumers and to other hospitals and other insurance companies all of the contract negotiations that carriers do between hospitals and doctors, and to let consumers see ahead of time how much their procedure is going to cost, no matter what procedure they get. So by January 1st of 2024, a consumer pricing tool has to be put in place by carriers that would allow you as a member of any insurance company to see the procedure you're going to have, exactly how much it's going to cost under the insurance contracts, how much of your deductible you've met, how much of your co-insurance you're going to owe, and how much out-of-pocket costs you're going to have in that procedure at least 3 days in advance, or as I like to call it, the time travel explanation of benefits. Because in reality, the odds of us hitting that number are very small. But we will make a good faith effort, we will comply. My good friend John Cochrane, if y'all know the economist John Cochrane, if you haven't heard of him, please look him up. His moniker is the grumpy economist. and he's brilliant. He was the head of economics at the Chicago School and then took over economics at Stanford. Think about that. It's almost like I was the Republican Party chairman one year and I was a Democratic Party chairman a few years later. In addition to that, Cochran's writing now for the Hoover Institute. So I took you around that loop to let you know his group studied the cost of the 3 projects I just showed you to insurance companies. $9 billion of IT work that the carriers will have to do under federal order over the next 3 years. To make it even more interesting, they did a cost-benefit analysis using CBO data of how much money all that work would save consumers, because the idea was consumers will save money. They figured that consumers would save between $100 and $125 million a year, giving us a payout on this delightful project of over 50 years. So when I saw that, my first reaction was, gee guys, can we just write all our members a check and say it's done instead of doing all the work? But you're going to see distortions in the insurance company marketplace, the way money moves through carriers, the way carriers talk about M&A activity based on federal orders of IT projects. Never seen anything like that before. Here it comes. Stand by and keep your eyes open and you'll get to see what's up. Oh, my phone's beeping. That means it's time for y'all to go back to work. Sorry. All right, last thing, and I'll turn you loose. I know Shard's like getting antsy over there. When you're thinking about dependents, I want you to think about my mama. My mama, Evelina Joy Tassin, Bertaut, right? This is her family, right there. She's 85, she lives in Morgan City. This is just her side of the family in June, right? There were 60 people at this family reunion last June, and every one of them knew everybody else at the meeting. And about a third of those people were enrolled in Medicaid. All of them had jobs. All of them were doing the things we expect our families to do. But a third of them, I counted, were enrolled in the Medicaid program. So if you don't think it touches everyone, please ask. And you can make somebody's day. You can be their hero if you can keep them enrolled in coverage so nothing bad happens to them financially. And that is it for me. You guys have been a delight. Thank you for having me on all this technical stuff, and I appreciate your attention. Have a great day.